My name is Kristen. I'll be the moderator for today's session. This is our third StoredIQ user group this year, and this session is going to be a bit different than our past ones. In the past, we've had a lot of open question and answer sessions with customers, StoredIQ experts, but today we're actually going to have a bit of a presentation for you on a recent project that our presenters have completed. Chris McHenry, our VP of Technologies at Integro, our Autoclassification expert, and Jason Brandes, a senior consultant at Integro and our StoredIQ expert, will be talking to you guys about auto-classification with StoredIQ. To make sure that they can get through all the content they have today and share all the information they want to share with you, we will be saving questions until the end of the presentation. But a few quick housekeeping notes before I give them the mic. At the end of the presentation, if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand, which is this button here. And then I will unmute you and you can talk openly to the presenters. And you'll also have the option to ask a question in the question box if you'd like, and I'll read that question out loud to them. Without any further ado, I will hand the mic over to Chris.
Thanks, Kristen. We're really excited to talk to you today about the integration of IBM content classification with StoredIQ. We've been using content classification here at Integro with our email management product for a number of years and had very good success in helping assist our users identifying records of the organization and filing them appropriately into the correct record category. And we've had the opportunity to recently use content classification with StoredIQ, and there's a number of exciting use cases that you can leverage these two products together with. The first one is one we actually deployed for a customer, is around information governance. So we were trying to crawl their content in a file share and identify the appropriate content that should be records of the organization, and obviously get it declared as records and keep it for the appropriate amount of time. Another compelling use case is e-discovery, so finding content that's relevant to a particular matter, and then taking appropriate action with it, either collecting it or putting it on hold, that kind of thing. Information security, so finding risky content in your organization or things that are improperly secured and taking appropriate action on that. And then just generally organizing and cleaning up your documents. You know, we've accumulated a lot of things in our file shares and ECM systems over the years, and just some good house cleaning is appropriate from time to time. And then finally, you could use it for business process routing of documents if you had more structured processes you wanted to drive content into. So those are some of the pretty compelling use cases for using the two technologies together. Today we're going to focus a lot on content classification, how you get that up and running in StoredIQ. So kind of diving into content classification. From the data store perspective, there's two different kind of data elements you can think of in content classification. There's the knowledge base, where you store the contextual information about your content, and you associate that with the categories or the taxonomy that you want to place that kind of content into. So again, we're trying to classify the content or you know, align it with our taxonomy. A decision plan gives us a way to do a rules-based classification, and it also can leverage the knowledge base for contextual classification. So you could drive certain content into a particular category based on a rule, maybe a particular metadata field, for example, and then if it doesn't match that, then you could run it through the knowledge base to get contextual classification. So you can kind of mix and match the two concepts, which is pretty handy from time to time. StoredIQ actually requires that you have both of these elements in place, so you have to have a very simple decision plan and a knowledge base to use content classification with StoredIQ. Some of the software components that you get with content classification, the classification workbench is where it's kind of your development environment, if you will, to build these two different data elements, decision plans and knowledge bases. If you don't have a taxonomy or a file plan or whatever you're trying to classify against, you can use the taxonomy proposer tool to look at your content and find light content and important concepts in that content and kind of propose the taxonomy for you. So it gives you a way to kind of get started if you don't have anything to start with today. Classification Center is a runtime tool to help you classify and review the classification of content in your file system, your FileNet P8 and CM8 content repositories and things like that. So you can run it against these different repositories and auto-classify content and then review how it was auto-classified. And then Classification Server is your runtime environment for your knowledge bases and decision plans. So that's where you deploy it to use it in conjunction with Classification Center. For StoredIQ, actually, you do not use the Classification Server. It accesses the knowledge base and decision plan directly. But you can leverage Classification Center in conjunction with StoredIQ to kind of review what it's done and manage it, reclassify stuff, that kind of thing. So the two can be used together. You just have to keep your decision plan knowledge base in sync between StoredIQ and your Classification Server. So content classification, maybe contrary to popular belief, is not just a black box kind of robot that can do all this fancy classification for us. You actually have to teach it something so it can do its job. And the way we teach it is we gather what we call a corpus or a collection of documents that match a particular category, and we label it by assigning those documents to that particular category. So a label is actually the category. So we collect this content set, and then we can load it into the Workbench tool, which we're going to demo in a minute. And we can tune it. We can review the content. We can take items out that are not good samples. We can add new items where we're missing some content. We can change words and phrases in the content, things like that. So we can really, there's a lot of tools in the classification workbench to tune that content set to build a better knowledge base. So we kind of iterate through that process and provide feedback, create the knowledge base, and get it to where we're very comfortable based on the analysis that we perform that the knowledge base is going to represent our content in a positive way. So once we've done that, we can deploy it out to StoredIQ, and then ideally test it on unseen data. So even though you've gone through and analyzed it in Workbench, you'd ideally want to test it against some new data that the content classification has never seen. And then once you're comfortable with that, you would use it in a production scenario. And then very importantly, you want to continually review the process and continue to refine it. It's an iterative, ongoing process. Sometimes the concepts that apply to a particular category, we call it drift. They kind of drift from time to time based on maybe the changing nature of your business or whatnot. So you need to continually refine these knowledge bases over time. So I'm going to do a demonstration of how you go through and build a knowledge base and then build a decision plan. Let me open up Workbench. So this is the development environment to build a knowledge base. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a new project. And there are two types of projects. You get the knowledge base and the decision plan, as I described earlier. So I'm going to select knowledge base for this one. Basically, we're going to walk through a little wizard to help us build a brand new knowledge base. The first step of the wizard says, what do you want to use for your content set to train your knowledge base? And I'm going to select the first option here. You could also pull in an existing knowledge base, or you could just create an empty project and add content to it later. I'm going to select the first option and pull in some documents. And then you can specify the format of that content. I'm going to select files in the file system. If you have some application data that you want to load in, you can use XML files. There's a predefined schema that you have to adhere to, but you could export content into that XML format and load it in here. Or you could use a CSV file, or if you want to use some Outlook data, you can load it into a PST and load Outlook emails into content classification, the workbench. The bottom two are kind of some internal formats you can use to exchange data between workstations or your content classification server. That's what the start file is used for. So I'm going to select a root folder to go crawl and pull my sample content in. And so it's gone through and listed out all the items in that folder. We can kind of review it, make sure we got the right content. We could apply filters if there's some documents in there, like maybe we have some mixed content and it has some executables or different things like that. We could filter that out with the apply filters. We can kind of refine what we import. So we're going to go with that, and then it lets us rename our categories. So it pulled in these categories from the path of the file system that we imported. So in this case, I might want to rename legal licenses, for example, to just legal. And I can do that very easily here. If I hit next, you can put some restrictions on the size of the content, so the import doesn't kind of go crazy. And some of the bigger content or files that are really large, you might want to include in your sample set anyway. So you can do that. And then we kick off the import, and it goes through and loads those files into kind of a structured database called the content set. So it pulls in metadata about the files, it pulls in the content of the files into the workbench here. And it just takes a few seconds to go through and get, roughly 460 documents. So it's pretty efficient to do that. So you can see this is our content set. On the left, we've got the categories that were pulled in from our file folders. And then we've got different fields that were pulled in. So we've got the subject or the file name and so forth. But the important one is the body. We can open these things up by clicking on item properties, and we can reassign the categories. We can modify the content and so forth if we desire to. So that's kind of the process of tuning. You might want to delete some of these out. That's a frequently done step in tuning the model. So you can go through and review it. There are also some various tools that you can use to find patterns or replace them with, null them out or replace them with text or something like that. So you can get kind of that extraneous content out of your content set. But we're just going to go through now and create a new knowledge base. So to do that, we use the Create, Analyze, and Learn wizard. And so what it's doing is create and analyze, or basically train and test. So we're going to create our knowledge base with a subset of our content set, and then we're going to use the other part of the content set to test or analyze the knowledge base. So we won't use it in the training, we'll use it for testing. So you can kind of pick how the content set's structured is the way to think of it. So the typical place to start is using even and analyze using odd. So every other one we'll use to train, every other one we'll use to test. You might be tempted to go down here and say create using all, analyze using all, but that is going to give you some skewed results for your testing. Just be aware of that because you've trained the model with all your samples. So the testing data probably will not be all that relevant. There are situations where if you don't have enough content, you might want to do that, but they're pretty rare. So these other options are probably more applicable usually. I'm just going to select, I want to create some summary reports to see how well the classification worked. And the rest of these will sleep the defaults. And then we want to add the match field. So these are the classifications that the tool gave it on that analysis or testing data set. You can also learn during analysis, which since we have the answers for those analysis data, we could learn from that as well, but I'm going to leave that alone for now. If I hit finish, it's going to kind of grind through. It's going to extract out the text from that content, create a knowledge base, get the concepts out of the text, analyze the test data, and so forth, and then finally run some reports that we can look at to see how well our knowledge base models those test samples. So I'm not going to hit everything in this in the reports. I'm going to highlight a few of the important ones here. So the first page here you see tells us kind of the breakdown across their content set. So you can see semiconductors is one that we want to look at. You know, it's only 3.25% of our content set, so it's got a low number of documents, something to be a little bit concerned about as we look at the other reports. So we'll kind of tuck that away for later on. You might want to look at this one to see how well we did. So our knowledge base data sheet shows us our top performing categories, and lo and behold, actually semiconductors did quite well. It got 100% on the test data, so it wasn't as bad as we thought. And the reason for that probably is that the sample documents and the test documents were very consistent. We had high quality and similarity between the two. So that's an important characteristic. We can have fewer documents if we have higher quality documents. And then we can see our poorest performing categories. I mean, we might want to get more samples for these, or review the existing samples and remove some of the kind of the extraneous concepts, the examples that illustrate other concepts that don't really fit in the category. Then down at the bottom, we can determine if any of these categories overlap. That's an important thing to do. We want to have our categories be discrete. So you can kind of use this to look at where you need to refine and tune your content set to get better results. The last thing I want to look at is the recommended threshold. And this report is important because it kind of is a dial that you can turn to pick the right threshold for your particular need. So there's not a right answer here, but you know, you can see there's different bands of very inclusive to very exclusive. So I'm going to try to talk through what that means and you know, show you a diagram on the PowerPoint here. So I pulled this from Wikipedia, so you can go out and find it, but this kind of illustrates what's called a confusion matrix. A little bit of statistics here, but on the left you can see the relevant element. So the particular examples that classification matched against that category, and then inside the circle are, or I'm sorry, the left hand side are the true, are the positives, and then inside the circle are the ones that the classification tool matched as a positive. So we have some that are true positives, some that are false negatives, and then we have some that are false positives and true negatives here. So precision is basically the measurement of our true positives of all the positives. So of all the selected elements in that category, the number that were actually true in that category. And then our recall is kind of the flip side of that, where the number of items in that category that were true positives that were returned as true positives. So you can see the left-hand side is all of our positives, the ones that matched accurately. So these were the selected elements. So if I go back to the, if I go back to the workbench here, so you know, the threshold is kind of like a dial, and as you increase the threshold, you can imagine that circle that we saw in the diagram gets smaller and has fewer results, but they're more accurate results. And then as you increase it, it gets wider and it catches more of the results. So if we want to catch more, we can go with these kind of thresholds on the left. If we want to get more precise, we can go with these kind of thresholds on the right. So you can kind of use that in your tuning as well. So that's all I'm going to show on the knowledge base. I want to make sure and save that, and then jump over and build a very simple, I'm going to create a new project for our decision plan. And the decision plan, again, can be used to drive rules-based classification and also tie in the knowledge bases for contextual classification. So I'm going to create the empty project here because I don't need to build a structure for it. I'm actually going to not go into detail in the decision plan too much here, but there's a lot to it. I'm just going to reference my knowledge base that I just built. I'm going to select that StoredIQ knowledge base. And then what we can do is define rules for a decision plan. So I'm going to create a brand new rule, and we'll just call this the match once rule, because we're going to match against one category. And then we want to trigger this rule always, because it's going to be our only rule, in fact. And then the action is basically we're just going to match against that knowledge base. So it's just a way to drive through the decision plan matching against the knowledge base. So we'll select our knowledge base that we referenced, and oops, make sure that's selected, and then we'll just leave everything else to the default. And that's going to be what StoredIQ calls into that decision plan, finds the knowledge base, matches against the knowledge base. It's really all we're going to show on this. Again, you could get a lot more complicated with your decision plan, but we don't have time to go into that today. All right, so back here at the presentation, wanted to illustrate a few of the best practices when you're building these knowledge bases. First of all, 30 is a rule of thumb. It's not an exact science, but try to get 30 samples at a minimum. And I always say quality or quantity, pick one. So as I mentioned with the semiconductor example, you can have fewer documents of higher quality, and you'll do okay with that. But as you have a category that encompasses a lot more variability or different types of concepts, you're going to want to get more documents to kind of smooth out that variability. So you'll need a lot more documents for, say, like a legal category, like we showed in the demo, than you would for a very specific category. The next point, just to reiterate, I think I hit on this already, but review the corpus. Don't just dump a bunch of documents in there and go. It won't work well. Spend some time. You need to go through. It's tedious, I know, but you have to go through and make sure you have high-quality samples to get good results. And then in terms of defining your taxonomy, make sure that your categories don't overlap. In other words, they don't have similar concepts in them. A good example might be having a category called legal and another category called contract. Usually contracts are legal documents, so there might be some overlapping concepts between those two things, and you could run into trouble. Those categories tend to steal from one another. And then no vague categories, so the general documents category, don't be tempted to throw something like that in there. It's really, really hard to model that in this tool, so try to avoid vague categories, be as specific as you can, and then avoid the non-category, because what I mean by that is you might have a file plan, for example, and then a category called non-record. Well, by virtue of not matching that any categories in the file plan, it's not a record. That's the way you need to think of it. So don't add the non-category into your taxonomy. So those are some of the best practices when you're building the knowledge base. So that's kind of an introduction to content classification, and I'm going to hand it off to Jason Brandes now to talk about how we go about getting this decision plan and knowledge base we built in the StoredIQ and using it in StoredIQ. So with that, Jason.
Thank you so much, Chris. Chris, do we have any slides for that, or am I just going to be talking through it? There we go. Appreciate it.
The slides up. Sure.
All right. So basically, one of the key components is Chris just went through the entire kind of going through that classification workbench. There's a quick start way of being able to do that. So if you do have some sample documents and you want to get a very good understanding of how it starts without doing all the refining and tuning, you can use the classification quick start. It won't give you very much precision, but at least it allows you to start understanding it. So once we actually do have a knowledge base and a decision plan, what StoredIQ is going to actually do is provide you a little utility down at the bottom left, sorry, I'll turn on the screen. But what we can actually do is export a utility that allows us to zip up that decision plan and knowledge base into a single zip file, which then can be imported into StoredIQ. As you can see here on the screenshot we have on the administrator page in the auto classification, the ability to create a model. By creating a model, it'll allow you to identify that zip file that's generated to contain those two files, and then you can bring that classification in here. As you can see, we've brought in a couple sample classifications into the screenshot. Just can you go to the next one, please? So once you've actually identified and you've imported and created that model in StoredIQ, you can actually do a step-up snippet. And what that's going to do is you're going to select an info set that you want that step-up snippet run on, and that step-up snippet will actually apply that decision plan and that knowledge base to the data within that info set. And what it's going to actually do is actually set a field on there that matches the categories, what categories match and what percentage. The default decision plan actually matches the top 10 categories. Chris showed one, but the default plan that's used usually matches 10 categories. You need to run the step-up snippet after you've imported the model so it has something to run against. And the step-up snippet is really going to go through all those documents, compare that knowledge base and that decision plan, and apply these values to each of the documents within that info set, which then allows us to do the next thing, which is really the key piece on the next slide, which is allowing us to search for it. As you can see here, I have a very simple example, but once you've, again, you've created your knowledge base and decision plan, you've imported them into StoredIQ, and you run the step-up snippet, which is the next step. Then the next piece is after that is, once I've imported that, I can actually have, when I select on auto classification under the build filter section, you can see that my categories will actually show up. And once those categories show up, you'll be able to select them, and StoredIQ will then present those that met that classification. And as with many other things, is what Chris said is, you're kind of training that, and you get drift in your classification over time. A lot of times, what we're seeing with the other clients is they're using this utility not only to identify contracts or to identify different types of documents, but also using it to help identify new documents so they can go back in and retrain the content classification piece. So I know we're running close on time. Kristen, were there any questions toward the end of this, or do we have any?
We do, yes. Thank you guys for presenting on this. Chris, would you mind going to the next slide as well?
Sure.
So while we have a few questions coming in, I just wanted to point out we do have here's a resource, this slide. You're welcome to join our StoredIQ user group on LinkedIn. And just a PSA, we will be having an in-person annual meeting of our user group at IBM Insight this year. All the information is on the slide. If you have any questions, would like a recording or the slide deck from this presentation, feel free to email me. My email is also on this slide. So we will hop into some questions. I know we're a minute away from the half hour, so if anyone has to leave, that's totally fine. We'll start answering questions now. The first question we have is, what types of documents can I use to train my model?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Basically, any type of textual-based document. So content classification uses this what are called outside-in filters, which is pretty comprehensive to be able to parse text out of a wide variety of document types. So generally speaking, there may be some slight exceptions here and there, but generally speaking, anything that's textual-based can be extracted and used in content classification. It does not, however, do OCR on the documents or anything of that nature. So for PDFs, for example, if you've scanned images into the PDFs and you don't have OCR, then that would not extract the text from that. But any other type of textual-based document you can pull in.
Awesome. Next question, piggyback onto that last one. What's a good ballpark number of documents I should use to train the system?
Yeah, so again, it depends on the number of categories you have and the nature of the categories, but I think I had it on a slide. It was 30 per category is the recommended minimum. You can go lower than that if you have really tight types of documents, but generally that's a good starting place to get started with.
Awesome. Next question. How can I update a content classification model used in StoredIQ?
Yeah, so with StoredIQ, what we've done, you can actually use the classification review tool to look at the results of your StoredIQ output. So you can review it with that and then update your knowledge base with that review tool and then redeploy it back to StoredIQ. So that's one way you could do it. Additionally, you could just work inside Workbench and refine your model or your corpus inside Workbench and then rebuild your knowledge base and redeploy it from there to StoredIQ.
And the last question, can I test new documents in Classification Workbench?
Yes, you can. You can import add content to your content set, and there are these different types of views that I didn't show, so you can kind of segregate those unclassified documents into their own view. And then it's not shown on the wizard when I demonstrate it, but the Create, Analyze, and Learn wizard has an option to score or match documents. So if you run that on the imported content in a view, then you can score those using the match wizard against those documents.
We actually have one more question that just came in. How do I access the review tool?
The review tool is installed with content classification and it's web-based. So there's a URL and I think there's a link when you install it as well, so you can just kind of launch the link and it'll take you into a browser and to that URL. But there is some configuration that has to be done with the review tool to use it properly with the particular content set. With StoredIQ, you usually point it towards the file system. You can also point that review tool at your ECM repository like FileNet P8 or CM8.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have today. Jason, Chris, thank you for your time. Everyone on the line, thank you for joining us. I guess we'll end it here.
Thanks, everyone.